Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Home of Houseplants podcast, and today I have with me a special guest, Peter Sargent, the curator, the owner, the custodian of the Bill Arboretum in far north Queensland. It's located about 10 kilometres north of the wonderful township of Mossman, and I'm sitting here with Peter on the porch of a beautiful property with a sun shower that's just passed 50 metres from a rainforest creek that's humming along beautifully, which I had to cross to get to Peter this morning. His lovely cattle dog beside us, Farmer, who is being a very relaxed and good boy, but you may hear a few barks throughout the podcast, and the sounds of bird life amongst this tropical paradise. I think we even heard the chirping of cicadas before. Are they cicadas, Peter? Peter Sargent, welcome, and I'm so grateful that you had the opportunity to meet with me today and speak to me about your arboretum.
Thank you very much.
Peter, I had the opportunity to come out yesterday and walk around with your friend and former employee, Julie, who runs The Plant Factor on Instagram. I think that's for those who are interested, _plant_factor. And Julie was the way I was able to come and meet with you today, in the sense that she has been a long-time employee and now friend, I guess, Peter, of yours.
Yeah, that's right. I've known Jules for probably 15 years or more, yeah, and she was part of the main crew back 10 years ago. Very enthusiastic.
She gave me the opportunity to join her as she walked around the part of the Arboretum which contains a lot of your aroids, the philodendrons mainly, a few monsteras that I saw, and she takes the orders that she receives on social media, and every Monday morning comes to your property and hand selects and picks the cuttings that people have requested that you have recently made available. About 3 or 4 months ago, Julie tells me that she convinced you, Peter, to start making parts of your collection available to people who are newfound hobbyists or people who've now developed a passion in collecting aroids and mainly philodendrons, to be able to access some of the spectacular specimens you have here. That's something new though, but before we get to that, can you tell me a little bit about the Arboretum and how very special it is? It started approximately when, Peter?
We started about 1982. The Arboretum's in a valley called Bill Valley. It has a major river system that runs through it, and probably about 10 or 15 other minor creeks that flow into the main Bill. We have a 3,500 foot mountain range behind us, which is part of the Sargent Tablelands and World Heritage Area. And that was one of the reasons that actually drew me to the area as a young adolescent. We'd come here because we really love exploring the rivers and really basically absorbing the micro niches and the things that used to grow in the very small protected areas close to the base of the mountains and along the sides of the rivers, where a lot of epiphytes and orchids and things used to grow. So that was one of my delights when I was quite young. So this area was really special in that sort of aspect. So seeing all these different plants in these small micro niches sort of really encouraged my interest in how plant diversity actually fits together, and that was one of the main driving things in the early years that made me starting to collect and research and take an interest in a lot of epiphytic plants. So things like aroids, the things that grow on trees, all these things as part of a jigsaw puzzle of the micro niches was something that really fascinated me.
So Peter, from what I understand speaking to Julie yesterday, when you started this arboretum, it was an empty paddock?
Yeah, the property is 40 acres. It was back in the hand cutting days of cane, it was a cane property, and then when machinery came in, the paddocks were too rocky. The valleys basically just granite rock and sand, so there wasn't a lot of really good soil. So when mechanical cane harvesting came, virtually all the Italian cane farmers that were in this end of the valley relinquished their cane contracts, because in the process of creating the cane paddocks they actually cleared all the trees away from the creeks. So because we have such a heavy rainfall, most of the paddocks were washed away each season. So when mechanical harvesting came, it wasn't a really ideal area, so the valley was left for probably 20-25 years. There were cattle people from Daintree, and the actual area where I cultivate that has become Winebill Arboretum had a few brumbies and horses on it. So when I came, it was basically guavas, lantana and grass. So yeah.
I gather you lived somewhere either on the property or nearby.
Yeah, adjoining property. I would walk down the road to the Arboretum, and yeah, that's basically how we started.
And you would basically chip away. So sourcing your plants at that point in time, are we talking 1970s, Peter?
Well, it didn't really start till the 80s. Around my old house, yeah, I had started, and friends of mine, Alan Carl, who had started going overseas collecting tropical fruit trees, was also another big interest for me. So I actually had a tropical fruit tree nursery in the beginning at my old house before the Arboretum actually started, and all at the same time in the beginning of the 80s. There was many different cultivating people starting to collect and research different families. So the fruit trees was one with Alan, and I actually used to work for Alan, and instead of money I would get plants, because at that age I was young and never had any money, so mostly I used to work for people in exchange. So the other thing that happened in the early 80s was the International Aroid Society, and there was actually a conference in Townsville that friends of mine, Arden Dearden and Robin Harris, attended, and there was lots of other things going on, especially with the Palm Society and collecting palm seed. So there's many things in the early 80s that was started as sort of the crucible for the Arboretum, which basically led me into 5 different families. So the 5 families that we actually cultivate on the farm are Ericaceae, which is the palm family, Araceae, which is the aroid family, Bromeliaceae, which is the bromeliad family, also Cycadaceae, the cycad family, and then flowering trees and fruiting trees from all over the world. So basically with that 5 families and the diversity that's contained with those families was the beginning of
the Arboretum.
Yeah, that's right.
Did you, obviously you were in the right place in terms of being in the right climate, but surrounded obviously by people who shared the same interest in collecting, well, I don't know how to describe it, Peter, at the time, rare and plants that were sourced from other regions of the world. Your interest is obviously diverse. It straddles what you've just discussed, those 5 categories, but it was essentially you were open to anything from there, and swapping and trading and just being part of this community at that time that enabled you to grow and care for the Arboretum and source the plants.
Yeah, that's right. It was sort of, if you want to compare it to something, it was like a fanatic young boy with a stamp album. So there was a book back in the book days, last century, which was actually like my Bible, and it was called Tropica or Exotica. A lot of people might know it by Graf, a German man. And I would spend literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours looking at the little photos and learning where the plants came from and going, oh, I want that one. Oh, I want that one. Oh, I want that one. So it was, I suppose, if looking back on it now, it's what people would call an obsession. Yeah. So apart from already existing growers in Australia, my closest friends were going overseas 2 and 3 times a year to parts of Asia, Central America, Africa, all different places, because in Australia in the late 70s and early 80s, which I was lucky enough to grow up in, it was sort of the end of the hippie era. Yeah. So it was the beginning of people, younger people, starting to go to different cultures and different places. So this was all part and parcel of it. So to me, the wonders of the natural world were, if you like to say, like the jewels, or somebody's collecting precious stones or something. But to me, these life forms were the precious things. They were the art, if you like to say, because in the early days I did a lot of potting and drawing and music and different things like that. But what I found was the structures that exist in nature were the most perfect form of art, and I suppose the legacy of it today is because I still do flowers, because in those days you think to yourself, oh, I'd like to be a painter or a sculptor, but then you always have to be able to sell the stuff, and it's not a very good income, whereas nature's art grows all the time. All you have to do is harvest it and put it together, and you've got an income twice a week. So
I should, and that makes perfect sense, Peter, and I should just add, for those that don't know, Peter has the benefit of harvesting some stunning ginger blooms and amongst others, and foliage at this property, and so Peter sells that to the Cairns area, to florists and wholesalers in the Cairns area twice a week.
Yeah.
That's a nice benefit, but your heart lies obviously with the plants in the Arboretum. Stunning collection, Peter. You obviously, when you said at that time in the 70s, when your close friends were travelling abroad, who were also fellow plant collectors, and back then quarantine was a very different sort of state of play, I think, and it was much easier to bring plants into the country.
It was similar but different, because the advent of the computer changed lots of things. When I actually first started, the Camarunga research station, which has now been demolished for whatever reason, didn't even have computers. It was the second year that I went there that they actually installed the computers. So that slowly changed a lot of things as far as listings and indices, because back in the last century there wasn't even inventories of the plants that had come through quarantine, which actually astounded me. And there also was no education as far as the DPI officers were concerned with what seeds actually look like what. So a lot of people in the early days would bring things in with a name that wasn't necessarily associated with it, merely to please the DPI or the quarantine officers, because their knowledge was so limited that if you put a name on it that they knew,
they were satisfied.
Yes, that's right. So lots of things have changed in that respect, as far as listings of things that are accepted and not accepted. But fortunately enough for us in the tropical areas, a lot of the collections were if you like to say, done before the turn of the century. So in Australia there's actually incredible diversity of plants from around the world actually in cultivation or planted here somewhere. So
in the backyards of people in Queensland, Sydney, it's amazing what you can find in the backyard that's been handed through friends, passed on.
That's right.
Inherited by chance when people buy a bush block. Wow, a different time and a different world, Peter.
Yeah, that's right. It was. So today it is a bit harder because of all the restrictions. But as I say, we should be content with what we've got here already and enjoy the cultivation of what we've already got.
Peter, I think mainly via Julie, whom I mentioned earlier, who runs the Plant Factor. I think a good description would be that she's connected you to the internet by her work in terms of exposing you to what's going on, perhaps more in the southern states, Melbourne, Victoria, New South Wales, everywhere, WA, Tasmania. There is a big boom at the moment in terms of people interest in growing plants. Mainly, as you would know, philodendrons. There's a huge level of interest amongst gardeners, but mainly younger gardeners, if I dare to say that, but gardeners generally, and a renewed interest in indoor plants, but mainly philodendrons. I'm interested to know your views. I mean, you're obviously very close friends with other fellow long-standing established collectors up here in North Queensland. Interested to know your views on the renewed interest. It can only be a good thing, Peter, can't it?
Definitely, because it takes me back to the memories of the actual first Aroid Society, International Aroid Society meeting that was held in Townsville, because when we turned up at the university where the conference was being held, like a lot of the societies in those days, and still these days, like the orchid societies and succulent societies and things like that, they mainly consist of people who had retired, so people between, say, 60 and 80. And
you would have been the younger person
in those days. Yeah, we were actually in our early 20s. So turning up at the conference, when we first got there, everyone turned around and just basically stared at us, because here were these three young people in complete contrast to everybody else that was there, so there's this huge age group. And so the resurgence of it is very interesting, because like through the years in the early 80s going into the 90s, with the Aroid Society and the International Aroid Society and the journals that we used to have, it was quite a big thing. But after 15 to 20 years, a lot of the interest sort of waned. So towards the late 90s and the turn of the century, if you like to say, a lot of plants go through eras of vogue, for whatever reason it might be. What happened particularly, which affected a lot of these things, was the commercial outlets and the organisations in Australia. So with the rise of things like Bunnings and home centres and things like that, the plants that used to be grown in smaller nurseries that sort of could have the time or the personality or person behind it to be able to propagate these sort of things was overtaken by tissue culture and mass production and Bunnings and things like that. So that was sort of a big spanner in the works for a lot of minor and smaller collections and nursery people. So they sort of went by the side, and the next generations sort of, if you like to say, all passed away, leaving sort of a void for a while. And we always knew that these would come back, because we always said like 30-year circles. With a lot of things, because looking back through the history of cultivation of plants in Australia, especially in the more northern regions, in the early 50s and 60s, the interesting things, or cultivators if you like to say, were the orchid people and the succulent people who were bringing things in from Brazil. And then as it sort of approached the late 60s, mid-60s, people started, orchid growers would be going to Asia and Malaysia and Thailand, and sort of that sort of influence brought a lot, surprisingly, a lot of other plants into the realm, because they were importing things. So a lot of the growers, especially orchid men, would take their wives to the international conferences, and they would bring back different things. So a lot of the early anthuriums and some philodendrons and things like that were actually brought in by orchid collectors from Brazil. And other interesting aroids like alocasias and things like that were actually brought back from Asia by orchid growers. So all these plants have their cycles for a lot of different reasons, but it's actually really good to be living in the time period where you, as a youngster, if you like to say, saw the beginning of a rise with the aroids in the 80s, and now again as we're approaching 2020 to see it rise again.
From my perspective, if I can just speak for those new collectors, it can be intimidating in terms of, reaching out to very well known and very well established collectors. And I'm thinking here of such as yourself. I'm thinking of Equatorial Exotics, and I'm thinking here of Michael Pascal, who's for those who don't know, the president of the Aroid Society of Australia, who lives in the Tully region. I hope to speak to Michael next, also a friend of yours, and one of the people who helped you establish, would that be fair, Peter, the Arboretum? Worked for you?
Yeah, like I was mentioning before, because it was the early 80s, sort of the end of the hippie era, if you like to say. I actually had a big old house that a lot of different people had lived in and worked with me in the early years, and I think Michael worked with me for probably nearly 10 years.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. But obviously you were once in our position as well. Obviously being that, as you said, that young fellow going to the to the International Aroid Association conference that was in Townsville, you felt the eyes on you, as you said, as you turned around. But if people out there who are just starting, persevere. If it is a genuine and ongoing interest, your passion for it will drive you through. But it leads me on to the next point in terms of the Arboretum. You are open to having visitors come and tour the Arboretum for a small fee, and they can, if people are travelling to far north Queensland, it's pretty accessible, and the roads are sealed all the way. I can attest to that. But as I said, it's not far away from Port Douglas, and it'd be a fascinating day trip if you are travelling to the Port Douglas area to hire a car to come out here. It's a good, easy half an hour drive, I'd say. Would that be fair, Peter, to the property? But you do need to make an appointment with prior arrangement. And Peter, I think that they can contact you directly by phone.
That's right. We have tours of the farm twice a week and by appointment. So I'm old-fashioned in that respect. So the phone number is 40-988 253. And because I'm a farmer, usually I'm out of the house, so it's good to make the appointments by phone at night. But most days, and even the weekend, by arrangement, we can do tours of the farm, but the main days are Tuesdays and Fridays. And we also have other places of interest in the valley as well. There's people are interested. There's a restaurant called High Falls Farm that they can have lunch at. and at certain times of the year there's a pottery gallery down the end of the valley, and there's also cocoa plantations at the beginning of the valley. So yeah, you can actually easily make a day of it.
The Mossman markets, I've come at the wrong time of the year for them to be at their peak. But I popped in on Sunday mornings in the township of Mossman, and I did meet one small plant seller there, but I gather when it's in full swing, you've also got the opportunity to perhaps pick up something unusual for the southerners amongst us. It wouldn't be unusual for you, Peter, but for those of us that do live south of far north Queensland, I picked up some beautiful plants there that I'm really excited to take home as well. But and if they do struggle, and I should say before that phone number, you just need to put the Queensland area code in, which I'm not sure of, but I'm sure
07.
07.
Yeah.
There we go. Peter, and when they do come, you take them around on the some kind of vehicle. Is it a walking tour?
No, it's a walking tour.
Yes.
It usually takes about 2 hours.
Yes.
But for people with different interests, I just tailor the tours basically to the different interests of the people who come.
Yeah, right. So if you are, particularly a philodendron lover, it is a place to come. I know those who adore bromeliads as well. Peter, one of perhaps your preferred genus, the bromeliads, I know.
Yep, we grow incredible diversity of bromeliads, and not only for the plant itself, but because of the flowers. So I use a lot of bromeliad flowers and in my arrangements, and also sell a lot of bromeliad flowers as a cut flower to florists and different people.
And of course then you've got the rare fruit and nuts. The good thing, I guess, speaking personally about the aroids, the philodendrons that I personally saw at the farm here, is it's not dependent on fruiting season. If you wanted to see a fruit and nut specimen, you might need to come at an optimal time during the year to see something in fruit. But the philodendrons never let you down up here. They're in fantastic condition 12 months of the year, and I don't know how to paint a word picture. I don't feel like I could do it justice, but what I witnessed was climbing philodendrons 15, 20 metres up tree trunks, established as well, vines, Peter, that would be as thick as my, being a 40-year-old female's wrist, if not thicker on some places. Crystallinums, Anthurium crystallinums. Gosh, can you put a number on approximately the range of philodendrons you have here?
Probably not, because I never actually, I've got in inventories, but I sort of never actually counted it, but just sort of off the top of my head, there'd be with the philo species, there'd be at least, there'd be 50.
50 species.
Yeah.
It's
and that's probably just the species, and there'd probably be a few more that were hybrids.
I think that's one project that Julie did mention to me, that she would like to start to categorise or have an inventory of your stock, and that's something on her to-do list amongst many other things I think she's keen to do with the Arboretum. But Peter, the last thing I just wanted to touch base with you is the future of the Arboretum. Obviously it's a stunning collection, but it is completely self-funded in terms of its upkeep, and perhaps a little bit of income that you make from the flower business as well. But I think we had a brief discussion yesterday about how do we preserve it, where to from here. It's an issue perhaps for you and your friends and fellow collectors who do have collections that would be,
I think this is a main thing going forward into the future, especially with the young people and the young generation, because once you've been doing something for 20 to 30 or even 40 years, you develop what's known loosely as a culture. So culture is the way that somebody or some people do things. So to pass on a culture, someone actually has to have a living experience. So in the old days, we used to have things that were called apprenticeships. Yeah. And apprenticeships were the process by which a younger person lives or stays continuously with somebody who has the culture, to learn the culture from them. And in the last 20 years, especially with the rise of the cyber world, for me, I felt very disheartened, because in all of these organisations and things that we would go to, like, you wouldn't see any representation from the younger generation. And this, in a way, to me, was sorry in a strange way, because everybody was looking away from the reality and not into it. But strangely enough, the cyber world has turned their eyes to very beautiful things, and that's what actually drew me in the beginning, was when you see the real beauty of something, it attracts you from the heart, not necessarily from your mind. So if you have that longing or that feeling and you're true to it, then the adoption of a new culture, or the learning of a new way, or the expression of being able to see these plants grow and become something very beautiful, is sort of the best joy you can have in life. So that's sort of what's always kept me tethered to the bit every single day, 7 days a week, because there's always something new when you go outside to see something flowering or a new leaf or something like that, and it never stops. So this is actually the continuous joy of it. But looking forward, as far as the Arboretum's concerned, it's a great concern for me that I don't have 5 devotional apprentices that can learn to cultivate and look after these different plant families, so that the actual members of those families can continue to have a life on earth. Because quite a lot of the things that are being collected and actually grow at the Arboretum, some of those things don't exist in the wild anymore. Wow. So with this growing trend of clearing the face of the earth, this is only going to be more and more of a relevant thing for the next generation to actually have to take on or hold or behold, because it'll be their responsibility to keep these things actually going, because the ecosystems that they belong to are being completely fragmented or destroyed. So the only possibility of their existence in the future is a propagation of by devotees. And by devotees, I mean somebody who, if you like to say, devotes their life to the propagation or the survival or the integration of these plants back into an ecosystem or back into cultivation.
Peter, I do think there might be a glimmer of hope in your eyes in terms of what technology is doing in bringing some people back to appreciate.
Oh, definitely. It has its place, because if you like to say, in my days, it was books that the photos in books that actually drew me to these plants and made me aware that they actually existed and where they existed and how they existed. So today the internet is that platform. For me, because I came from the world of books, I don't have I need to have another life to use this cyber world. I need to be 2 people, because the things that take my time during the day is all day and half the night, so I could never have time to do stuff on the internet. Yeah.
Oh, look, absolutely. I do think that there's social media is bringing a new generation of plant lovers to this hobby for some, passion for others, And I do very much see it as a reinvention of what you experienced as a young man. It's just the modern platform of how it's accessed. But of course, there's some people who will just want it for the aesthetic qualities. Others who are passionate collectors and delve deeper down the rabbit hole to really, learn about the genus, learn about its growth habits and so forth. But I think each are equally valid, and any attention is good attention in some respects. But it's just a question for you, obviously, and Julie and your family to ponder about how we preserve the Arboretum and the stunning collection you have within it. So hence, perhaps a matter that we'll explore together further and try to come to some way to tackle that. But I do know that you have had a bit of media attention here. For those who would like to see Peter's Arboretum from the comfort of their homes without travelling to far North Queensland, you were profiled on Gardening Australia, Peter?
Yeah, that's right. They actually did me twice. 10 years ago they did one, and then last year. So in the archives of the ABC somewhere, there's actually two little sessions on the Arboretum.
Yeah, and I think you can see that online. There's this ABC iView, I believe, which is the web page where you can access all previous episodes of Gardening Australia. So I think I've only seen the original one. I will have to go back and have a look at the most recent episode. But
Jerry came both times for the interview. Jerry from Gardening Australia.
Peter, it has been my absolute honour and privilege to meet you, to meet Julie, your friend and colleague here at the Arboretum, and to see this stunning property. It's, from a southerner's perspective, Peter, it's truly paradise that you live in, and I can see just the passion in your eyes and just your devotion to the Arboretum and the plants that are contained therein. As we mentioned earlier, if you would like to travel to see Peter's Arboretum, Bill Arboretum, you can call Peter direct in the evening hours, preferably before 9 p.m. But during the day he's busy gardening and tending to the flowers and plants. But otherwise, for those of you who prefer Instagram, Julie at The Plant Factor is the best person to also contact, but particularly so if you'd like to mail order some of the cuttings from Peter's Arboretum. And I think Julie does put out a weekly list and of everything that's available for sale, and that changes regularly as well, Peter, I think.
Yeah, she adds to it and everything every week.
And the only other development everyone should be aware of is that currently it's cuttings that Julie makes available, which are from the plants that are at their best to be harvested. And I think you rest plants after a while if they've been harvested too much so that they can recuperate and regenerate. But I think the intention is in future months to start offering for sale rooted cuttings or plants.
That's right, yeah.
And obviously they'll be small enough still to post. But, as a customer as well of Peter's, I've certainly ordered a heap of cuttings, and I can highly recommend it. And you know that all the proceeds of the sales are being funneled back into the Arboretum and to support Peter's wonderful cause. So, Peter, I'll call it an end to the podcast, and thank you very much for giving me an hour of your time today, and indeed just meeting with me yesterday to show me around your stunning garden.
Thank you very much.
Bye, Peter. Thank you for listening to this episode of Home of Houseplants. I really do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would love for you to subscribe and leave a review, as it does help many others find the podcast, and in particular those that share the passion, the obsession that is growing indoor plants. I would like to give a shout out to Music Bed for the fabulous cool beats that you've heard during the course of this podcast and throughout the episodes. Home of Houseplants has a licensing agreement with musicbed.com to support the artists, both emerging and established. If you do wish to contact me, please do so via Instagram at Home of Houseplants or via my email address, which you can easily find on the website, homeofhouseplants.com.au. Please enjoy the week, the day, your evening, whatever time you are listening to this podcast, and I look forward for you to join me on the next episode, whenever that will be in the future. Bye, guys.